You identified a problematic pattern in Indian Supreme Court decisions when it comes to environmental issues. Can you describe this pattern and its implications?
Yeah, what I found when I examined the public interest litigations to the Supreme Court in the 1990s was that Supreme Court used different kinds of logics and reasonings. Sometimes it was active vis-a-vis the government. At other times it said the government has the power to decide, not the courts. But whether it was going for judicial activism or judicial restraint, I found that a certain formula evolved over the decade with reference to public interest litigations on environment, development, people's lives and livelihood. And what I found was that wherever there was a public interest litigation calling for saving the environment from people's lives and livelihoods, the Supreme Court acted very, very swiftly to uphold environment over people's lives and livelihood. Now, this environment, the idea of the environment, was either a kind of urban middle class life, urban middle class's rights to fresh air, clean environments, etc. So environment was either understood in that way, or it was understood in terms of forests being state property and supposedly protecting the forests, but actually rendering thousands of forest communities that have lived in forests for generations, rendering them illegal and encroachers overnight. So that was what I found. So I call that environment trumping people. And then there was another kind of public interest litigation, which wanted the protection of people's rights and livelihood over big mega development projects. In such cases, development was upheld over environment. So the second kind of public interest litigations, which demanded that such projects should undergo environmental checks and said that there are ecological costs, there the courts consistently said development must come before environment. So I call this formula environment trumps people, development trumps environment. And it's deeply problematic from the point of view of a genuine environmentalism, which thinks about environmentalism as related to people, lives, livelihood, living sustainably, and so on.
And you say that people shouldn't rely on the state or the law for a way out of the ecological crisis. What ways would you see?
Well, I think there is no way the current contemporary state is interested really in protecting the environment. The state is interested in using the environment as a resource for corporate exploitation, and as a result, it might take some measures to protect the environment, but only as a resource for capital. So I don't actually see states coming in. I don't see that as a plausible scenario that states come in to actually protect life and livelihood, as well as the environment in a sustainable sense. So I think what would work is actually resisting communities insisting that we will control our resources in our locality. So there have been these kinds of moves in India. A tribal council in the Niyamgiri Hills actually took a decision not to allow mining in the hills. In Nagaland, there's been some attempt to talk about resources being controllable by the regional unit of the state rather than the Indian government. Now, that can be problematic because it could simply be that we will control our resources to exploit them ourselves. So but if we are thinking of ecological movements, they will have to, I think, be a little. I think there will be a phase when they will either move into militancy, because in India, ecological movements have been consistently non-violent and extremely, it's been the most massive movements of civil disobedience, and the Indian state has just wiped them out. In many ways wiped them out, but they've left a legacy of very powerful resistance. So I think ecological movements will have to be more local, will have to be more militant. I am not sure what form that militancy will take, but I think it will have to.
Mm-hmm. To talk about a different topic, as a feminist, you also very much engage with questions of reproductive rights, among them the issue of commercial surrogacy. Can you tell us a little bit about the feminist debate in India on the issue?
Commercial surrogacy has actually really picked up in India over the last few years, and India has become a hub for medical tourism, and of different sorts. Medical tourism, because India offers world-class services at cheaper rates, so there's a lot of medical tourism. But commercial surrogacy in particular has really picked up, and it's very troubling for democratic rights activists, for feminists, because the women who choose to do commercial surrogacy are almost always extremely poor, and very often they are pushed into the business by the men in their family. Most often they don't approach doctors themselves, but there are middlemen who set up these kind of networks. So under these conditions, the act of commercial surrogacy is extremely exploitative of the woman concerned. And so feminists have been, so the debate, I guess, it's not become a full-fledged debate in that sense, because we are still there's still so much that we don't understand about the business, which is booming. But I think the debate would broadly fall into a certain kind of position which says commercial surrogacy should simply be banned, because there is no way we can ensure the good working conditions for commercial surrogacy, and besides, commercial surrogacy cannot possibly be a healthy option for a woman. So there is, because it involves actually going through extensive hormonal treatments and all of that. And recently an egg donor died in a hospital. So it's actually becoming more visible that the practice is hazardous for the health of the women. So there is a let's ban the practice kind of voice emerging. But the other side, I guess, who was equally concerned, and this is also from within feminists, the worry is that if you ban it, it simply goes underground, and then you cannot monitor it at all. So then the attempt is to actually work on legislation that will protect the rights of all three parties, because current legislation tends to think of the interests of two parties, the doctors and the contracting parents. And the commercial surrogate is treated as a kind of object who has to be regulated. So the law says, for example, that she can't have sex after she's entered the process for 1.5 years. She can't have sex with anyone, and if she's married, she needs her husband's permission, and so on and so forth. So she's the object which is being regulated by the law, and obviously we need then, in that case, if we believe that it needs to be regulated, we need a law that will take on board their concerns. But the real worry for me, and for I think many of us, is that we don't actually get to hear the voices of the surrogate women themselves. They are completely invisible. Largely they prefer to remain anonymous, because it seems like such a stigmatized form of work. It kind of gets related to sex work in India, and they don't want to have to explain to neighbors, I'm not pregnant because I had sex with someone else, but because I went to a doctor and so on. So they're anonymous because of the fear of being seen as immoral, and so you really don't see them, and it's very worrying, and we hope that their voices will emerge soon so that we can make sense of the debate.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.